Gentlemen, good evening or good afternoon, or depending on where you are. So just a short brief of the alternative sentencing in the Kingdom of Bahrain. So the alternative sanctions in Bahrain, of course, it's a reformist approach in justice and human rights, and the fundamental freedoms, with no doubt, are the core elements of the reform project, which was initiated by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, and it is therefore natural, of course, for the legislation to be reflected with these enlightened ideas and meet the requirements of justice and human rights standards. So Bahrain pioneered, as you all know, the legislation for alternative sentencing, passing a law in 2017, implemented on the 16th of May in 2018. So we move on to the types of alternative sanctions. Of course, we have the non-contact pledge. There are seven types of alternative sanctions. So the non-contact pledge and the prohibited access to certain places, the house arrest, community service, remedying the damage, and rehabilitation and training programs, and the electronic tagging. The types of alternative measures are five. We have the attending the police station from the offenders when ordered to, prohibited access to certain places, electronic tagging, non-contact pledge, and house arrest as well. So just an idea of the system of the alternative sanctions, and it's a very, very short idea, of course. So it starts at the, of course, with the trial judge in the execution judge, where he orders within the sentence of alternative sanctions law. It then passes on to the prosecution of sentences execution, where they give one or more alternative sanctions. That's by law, of course. It then gets to us in the Ministry of Interior. We receive the alternative sanctions orders. And of course, the division of alternative sanctions is the core element here of the follow-up of all the alternative sanctions. Of course, when I say follow-up, it goes two ways. If hopefully everything is successful, the offender, he or she completes the alternative sanction, and there's a final report that goes back to the public prosecution. Of course, those reports are scheduled weekly, but of course they're even daily, and then there are some weekly reports and monthly and so on, until the final report, which says it all, shall I say. And it could go the other way, of course, and the report that goes to the public prosecution could be a violation. We report the violation to the public prosecution. If the alternative sanction could then get cancelled, that of course depends on the judge, not on us. So just something that I thought of is the effect of alternative sanctions on the inmates and the reform and rehabilitation centers. I actually am planning on starting a study, which unfortunately I don't have today to show, on how the alternative sanctions affect the inmates and their behavior, of course, while in prison. And that's, of course, so they could receive an alternative sanction and have a second chance, of course. And also we noticed their behaviors while in prison and then out, and while they're at the rehabilitation center. It's a total difference, and we're working on a study that hopefully, in my opinion, needs time. As you know, we're fairly new to the project, so we need some more time to gather this information, and hopefully it will be with us one day. moving on to the positive impact of second chances. That's, in my opinion, it's just the alternative sanction in an informal way is a second chance. Of course, I could also say that growing up as children, we all had second chances. So when you become an adult, I mean, obviously we're all still human, so we're open to more mistakes. And it's just giving the offender a second chance to start over. As you know, an offender, I mean, he or she could be involved in let's say, many cases, but those cases could even get more and more and more depending on what the offender goes through. And that could lead to something that maybe just, it's the incorrect path. And instead of just remaining in prison and having that sort of mentality, he or she deserves to have a second chance and just go out there and move forward. And of course, moving on to the numbers, we could see that the second chance or the alternative sanction is nothing but a success. So as of today, of course, the total numbers was mentioned earlier in this meeting. It's 3,098. But if we would talk specifically about the types of alternative sanctions. So the community service, so those are the recipients that are based on the type of alternative sanctions. So in community service, they were 1,775. And in the rehabilitation and training programs, they were 805. Prohibited access to certain places, 906. Non-contact pledge, 635. Remedying the damage that was caused, 297. And electronic monitoring, 88. And house arrest, 14. Of which 2,651 were men, 200 were women, and 247 were young offenders. So up to today, the cancelled alternative sanctions were only 8%, and the decisions that are pending to be executed are 46%, and the executed decisions are also 46%. So our future plans is, of course, introducing electronic rehabilitation programs, which we already began in some programs. Also introducing a follow-up program after the offender completes the alternative sanction. So we intend to follow up and see how he went on in his life, his or her life, and how did it go on? Did they commit a crime again? Did they move forward and proceed? So that's very interesting, and we're looking into that. An establishment of an integrated rehabilitation and training center for the offenders, something specialized that could have classes such as something that they could specialize in, and then maybe use to apply for a job and such and such. Pending approval of jobs, of course, we're waiting on the private sector to offer us some more jobs, and developing a plan to reduce breaches, of course. And I believe I have a video that Ms. Reem, I think, is going to play, so I think we could move on to her. And for now, I'd just like to thank you all for your attention. I tried to keep things as short as possible, just sticking to the agenda. Any questions, anything at all, we could move. I'm happy to help.
هذا علي وهو على وشك إنقاذ حياة. قبل 3 أشهر علي ما كان مسعف. علي انحط في موقف كان ممكن يدمر حياته، وفي الحقيقة كان علي على حافة الخطر. تورط علي في حادث مروري أدى لإصابة شخصين وتضرر وايد من السيارات وممتلكات عامة، كل ذي لأنه كان يسوق سيارته بسرعة كبيرة وكان منشغل بالهاتف النقال وفقد السيطرة على سيارته. تم تسجيل إفادته من قبل الشرطة معاه في النيابة، وبعدها أحالوه إلى المحكمة الصغرى الجنائية. وهو قاعد بانتظار النطق بالحكم كل اللي كان يفكر فيه هو عائلته، شنو بيصير فيهم، شلون بيقدر يعيلهم وهو في السجن، شلون بيتقبلون فكرة ان ابوهم في السجن. حياته قاعدة تدهور، افكاره صارت مشوشة، وكل ذي كان بسبب غلطة منه. وبعد كل الوقت اللي انتظره عشان يسمع الحكم، صدر ضده حكم بالإدانة بالحبس لمدة 3 شهور وغرامة مالية كبيرة. ولكن لأن كانت أول جريمة له وأن العقوبة كانت أقل من عام، وبسبب ظروفه الاجتماعية تم استبدالها بالعقوبة البديلة، ما بتخليه يتعلم الدرس بس، ولكن بتخليه يساعد الناس طول عمره. قرر القاضي أنه يستبدل عقوبة الحبس بأداء عمل في الخدمة المجتمعية كمرافق مسعف، يساعد ويوجه ضحايا حوادث المرور بشكل مباشر. في بعض الأوقات الناس الطيبة يقومون بأعمال سيئة أو تصرفات خارجة عن إرادتهم وغير مسؤولة، ويا الوقت أن يأخذون فرصة ثانية وأمل جديد، لأن ما تدري شنو ممكن يصنعون من هذه الفرصة. هي فرصة للإحساس بشعور الألم والمعاناة اللي سببها علي للآخرين الأبرياء، فرصة لتصحيح الأخطاء اللي ارتكبها وتعلم منها، فرصة يكون إنسان جديد بفكر ناضج وعلى قدر من الالتزام وتحمل المسؤولية.
تطرق لها الأخ القاضي حاتم، الإحصائية بخصوص التكاليف هي موجودة وإن شاء الله بتوصلكم، ولكن بس للعلم هو طبعًا كل دولة تختلف، حتى عن بالنسبة عن اللي تكلمت عنها دكتور نقطة النساء والأطفال، هاي على طبيعة كل دولة. وحتى موضوع التكاليف بعد يمكن من دولة لدولة تختلف، لكن مو بغلط إنها تكون مرجع، وإن شاء الله إحنا بنكملها، لأن هي ما أبغى أقول إن هي كاملة، هي يعني قاصرة عن كاملة، شيء بسيط، وإن شاء الله بتوصل للجميع إن شاء الله.